And welcome again to Cottage Talk. I am Russ Goldman. Joining me right now is Dan Crawford from HammyEnd.com and also from the Green Pole podcast. This episode, Dan and I are going to preview the upcoming match for Fulham against Southampton at Craven Cottage on Saturday. I look forward to getting Dan's thoughts on this match. Along with that, hoping to have a guest at the bottom of the hour to talk a little Southampton with us, a member from a podcast that covers Southampton. Hopefully he'll be joining us at the bottom of the hour. But beforehand, we have a lot to talk about. It has been a long time, Dan, since you've been on the podcast. Dan, welcome back to Cottage Talk.
Thanks, Russ. Always a pleasure. I don't think you've had me since the first day of last season. And too much time has gone by, and Fulham have been very good, so maybe I shouldn't appear on this podcast, and we could go through the whole of 2023 unbeaten as well. Anyway, look, great to be with you, mate.
Listen, Dan, it's an honor having you on, and I've said this several times. I even tweeted this out recently. Cottage Talk doesn't go as long as it has without you, you know, especially when Kyle Bond, who actually wrote a very nice article, I hope everyone reads it in Sporting News. I was doing it with him originally, and Kyle moved away at the time to Perth, Australia, and you stepped in and you helped keep it going and actually helped it thrive. So thank you, Dan.
It wasn't just me. You put in most of the work, but there are many other co-hosts that you've had through the time. Indeed, we were talking about it just before we began going live. You know, I had a conversation with one of your co-hosts. I forget what all the days are after Christmas. Some time between Boxing Day and now. I don't know about you. I had a conversation with Max Cohen, a great guy, just tremendously positive about everything. And he has, I got to know Max through having discussions with you on this show. So it's always great to be back, my friend.
Oh, well, it's, like I said, great to have you back. Unfortunately, I want to talk about two sad subjects. We're going to talk about the passings of Pele and George Cohen. Let's start actually with Pele, and then we'll talk a little bit about George Cohen. I talked about him on a prior episode, but I want to talk about Pele, and I learned something about Pele that I did not know, Dan. Your connection to Pele. I listened to the Green Pole podcast, so if someone has listened to that, I'm sorry if you're going to hear a little bit of the same story, but I want to get your thoughts about how you struck up a relationship with Pele, and obviously the sad news that he passed away.
Well, let's start with the most important thing. I mean, there's no doubt in my mind that Pele is simply the greatest footballer to have graced the earth. You know, I haven't seen all the footballers on the earth. And I obviously didn't see Pele. You know, I'm not old enough to have seen him play. But there is just no argument about both his skills as a footballer and his transformational effect on the game, particularly being a man born in real poverty in Brazil, and what he did for the Brazilian nation, both outside of sport and through his sport. And the story is very simple. Russ, I, with some school friends, had a sports newspaper. It's quite funny. We fancied ourselves as entrepreneurs in high school, and one of my friends, I'm not going to embarrass them, but anyway, they supported two of the other teams in West London that I'm not going to name. Okay, not the one that I really don't like that we can't name. But the other two, one of them is in the Premier League, and Alexander Mitrovic scored a last-minute header against them. And one of them played last night, and Stefan Johansson plays for them, although not at the moment. So regular, Fulham fans will know the two teams that I'm talking about. And so we got together, and each of us would do a match report from the match that we'd been at, and we would go home, print out the newspaper, get all the full-time scores, and go to the train stations and sell this newspaper. It's in the days before the internet, smartphones, anything like that. And there used to be a tradition, sort of in the 1970s, that you'd have like an evening newspaper at 6 o'clock on a Saturday that would give the full-time scores. Anyway, it got quite popular, ridiculously quickly, because lots of men were taken shopping by their wives, and vice versa, it has to be said, and couldn't go to the football, and therefore they needed to see the results, and you didn't have the internet. So anyway, we went and sold it at a party where loads of advertising executives were, unbeknown to us, and people were very impressed. And so somebody from Saatchi phoned my house phone and asked my mother if Daniel would like to interview Pele and
Wow.
Eddie Jordan of Jordan, what was Jordan Formula One Racing. They're no longer Jordan Formula One Racing, but they were one of the leading British teams for a while. And my mother put the phone down. She said, there's no need to prank a young boy by sort of ringing up. And they actually got in contact with my school to say, I think there was a problem. We would like to ask Dan to conduct an interview with these people for BBC Children in Need, which is a show that goes out every winter to encourage people to support young children or families with difficulties because their children are disabled or in need of sort of care for life-changing conditions, cancer, leukemia, conditions where children may not even recover. And it's a thing that goes out at Christmas. Anyway, eventually, once we got over the miscommunication, of course you jumped at the chance to interview Pele. I mean, what a ridiculous... they shouldn't even have to ask the question. Anyway, I was this was right after the 1998 World Cup in Golden Square in London, Saatchi's headquarters. And anyway, everything that Pele says was carried live on Brazilian television. This was carried live on the BBC News, whatever their channel was called. It wasn't called BBC News 24 then. And they didn't tell me, but also live on Sky News. And they didn't tell me any of this. So, but anyway, they were sufficiently concerned that, I might fluff my lines or whatever. And so Pele just ad-libbed a bit in the introduction and said, well, before Dan asks his questions, I'd like to ask, who do you, which football team do you support? And so I told him. And he said, Fulham! This is fantastic. I played at Craven Cottage for Santos in 1973. It's the only London ground. It's the only London ground I played at, and I loved it. I loved Craven Cottage. The fans were there. They cheered me. I was worried about how I was going to be received in London because I played in the 1966 World Cup, didn't do very well, and they loved me. It was wonderful, and I've always loved Fulham. And I was only meant to have 5 minutes myself with him because all the other journalists wanted to speak to Pele, and clearly, and he stayed for 5 hours, talking to other journalists, but he gave me 5 hours, and I got a great exclusive for my little sports newspaper, and he's covered it. And God bless Pele, he sent me a Christmas card that year, and every year since, until last year, and they were always in English. And last year, he sent me a Christmas card that was in Portuguese.
Right.
And I thought, okay, well, my Portuguese is passable, but not good enough. So I got someone to translate it, and it said, the normal message was there, and then the last sentence said, please congratulate Marco Silva on a fantastic first 6 months at my favourite London football club. Wow. Come on, you white. They translated "Come on, you whites" into Portuguese.
That is incredible.
Whatever was closest to it. And there you are. And I would just say he had no reason to keep in touch with me, and because Pele was a global superstar, but he was just an absolute gentleman, and I was sort of 12, 13 years old, and it's a memory that myself and my family and will have for our whole life. And he became a scout for Fulham in Brazil and South America for a little while, and he was just a remarkable man. I was fortunate enough to meet him once more, and clearly he was in failing health for some time. But yeah, he's an incredible guy, and we're very grateful. It's just, even now when I'm telling you about it, Russ, it's sort of it's 25 years later, and I still don't believe it actually happened.
It's wonderful, Dan. And
there you are.
The type of person he is, and you are too, that you obviously have kept this friendship. I know we're talking about Christmas cards, but he doesn't probably do that just for anyone. So the impact you had on him was pretty obvious there, because he doesn't keep in contact with you if he didn't feel that way about you.
He was very special, and he was kind enough to sign a Brazil shirt for me that hangs in another part of my house, and it will do, and that's ever so nice. And he was like that to most people. It is not an uncommon story, swapping stories with people who are fortunate enough to meet Pele. But the Fulham connection is just brilliant.
That's fantastic.
Yeah,
it is fantastic. And that was, again, when I heard it this morning, I'm like, oh, I can't wait to talk to Dan about this, because I thought it was unbelievable and just such an honor for you, and to have that memory. And like you said, 25 years later, like it was yesterday. So I wanted to start by talking about Pele, but I also want to talk about, and I mentioned this already, about George Cohen. I want to get your thoughts on the impact he had at the club and what he means to the club.
Well, I mean, I don't think I can add any more to what's already been said. And, again, it's important for me to reference the fact that I didn't see George Cohen play, and that's very obvious from the age that I am. But that doesn't mean that I can't speak about the qualities of George Cohen, because I came to know him late in his life. He was a match day host at Fulham Football Club, and indeed in lots of the charity work. He's a proud trustee of the Bobby Moore Cancer Fund, which raised money for cancer research in light of Bobby Moore's cancer diagnosis. And George Cohen beat cancer at least twice, and he was a very brave man. And I was very involved in the Bobby Moore, and still am very involved in the Bobby Moore Fund, because it's very important that we continue to not only carry out that very important medical research, but support the legacy of Bobby Moore, another Fulham great, even though we didn't have him quite as long as George Cohen. He was at West Ham, but he saw the light and came to Craven Cottage and played a part in some successful times. But George, I got to know through his charity work, and he in very similar, and George and Pele were, as I understand it, reasonably close themselves, in terms of, because they played against each other briefly for England and Brazil, and I like to think, as I said elsewhere, I do like to think that they're having a conversation right now about winning the World Cup, and that's very nice. But George was an incredible guy, a character who gave everything on the field. That was quite clear. But he genuinely loved Fulham Football Club. He genuinely loved people, and he would speak to anybody who wished to speak to him. Much to the consternation of his family and friends, particularly in later days when George was not in the best of health and needed to be careful. But if somebody wished to speak to George, then he would make time for them, regardless of who they were, because he recognised, much like Johnny Haynes, that he was fortunate to play football, and he was fortunate to play for Fulham. And for a lot of younger supporters, he made time to, I was fortunate enough to sit with George Cohen for an hour. Would have been about 6 years ago now.
Wow.
And he just shared memories with me personally of playing with Johnny Haynes, winning the World Cup, everything. And then we very much talked about Slavica Jokanovic and the team, and how we were going to get out of the blooming Championship, and was he going to play Ryan Sessegnon, and was Ryan Sessegnon going to, is he going to be the next great player? And George Cohen said he's got everything. He can be as good as, he's going to make his debut at 16. He's beaten me. He's beaten Johnny Haynes, and he can go right to the very top. And I think we're gradually seeing that with Ryan now. Even although he's not playing for Fulham, we should still be very proud of Ryan's emergence. And I think George is just a a wonderful man. He has a tremendous legacy, of course, because not only did he win the Football World Cup, his nephew Ben Cohen won the Rugby World Cup for England.
Wow.
And that is unique. Okay, so but he leaves a huge legacy as having played his entire career at Fulham, turned down offers to go elsewhere, then dedicated himself in the community with charity work and through his family to be a matchday host and make sure everyone had a great time. I mean, that is very clear in terms of the people who sampled the hospitality at Fulham Football Club, that they all had days that they would, George and Daphne, his wife, took great care as a team in making sure that anyone who went into the George Cohen suite, had a special day to remember. Whether they were going for the first time and only time in their lives, or whether they were regulars, didn't matter. It was important to them that they had a special Cohen hospitality. And having received the Cohen hospitality myself in a different setting, I can say that it was first class, and he is Fulham through and through. And I know that we'll do him proud tomorrow.
Yes.
And going forward. This is very important, that it's not just tomorrow, a nice applause for both George and Pele, but that George Cohen, Johnny Haynes, the figures of Fulham's past are properly honoured in a way that educates people about their contribution to the football club.
Yep.
And keeps those legacies alive, because that's really important.
Dan, I want to ask you this, and again, I've not heard any of this. I've only just seen comments on social media. Do you think at some point the club might consider naming the Riverside Stand after George Cohen? Do you think they should?
I think we have to be... Look, I don't want to sit here and say the football club should or shouldn't do something.
Okay.
At the moment, because first of all, it's a very raw time for George's family. They need, anything that carries George's name would need to be approved by the family, and I can't see why they wouldn't approve of something like that. I would say to you that I'm quite attracted to a different idea, which is, and it's just one that I've been playing around with. So you've already got the Johnny Haynes stand.
Right.
Yes, we've renamed the Stevenage Road as the Johnny Haynes stand. You've got Craven Cottage. There's a lovely story in the obituaries that George was attracted to coming to Craven Cottage to watch, and chose Craven Cottage because he could bunk in over the Putney, what was then the Putney end, and not pay. Right, he could climb over the fence and get in. Right, I like the idea that the Johnny Haynes stand, the Craven Cottage, and then the George Cohen stand at the Putney end.
Oh,
right?
Okay.
Because that used to be the home end back in the when George.
It's actually a very good idea then.
Now that way he's close to. You've then got two stands that are next to each other, separated by Craven Cottage, and the Riverside stand. I mean, look, clearly there's a sort of revenue and commercial implication about the Riverside stand. I don't know what the club wants to do. Genuinely, I don't know. Genuinely, I think the club will need to do something very special to commemorate George Cohen. He's already got a statue, right? And the issue is, we're going to run out of naming opportunities very quickly if we start, and I think it needs to be appropriate, but we need to look at it in the cold light of day, and I wouldn't like to say one way or the other exactly what we should do until George's family, who is still grieving, right, have the opportunity to sit down and think and reflect on all the tributes that have been paid to their husband, their father, their uncle, our friend, our great Fulham legend. Because you'll remember, Russ, that we took some time as a football club to name the Johnny Haynes stand after he passed away, and we took some time to construct a statue for Johnny, and we took some time to fundraise for all of those things, and we had to do it appropriately, and there are all sorts of things you have to do with regards to licenses and everything like that. And I just think it's appropriate to pause and think about what is the best way, and what is the way that we can make sure that we commemorate all of our players appropriately and continue that support for them. Now, clearly we want to do something special for George, but, we only have 4 stands.
Right.
And, you'll understand why I am particularly attached to the Hammersmith end, as why it's the Hammersmith end, right? So we've got to be very careful, because we can't, when someone else dies and we've run out of names to, we just got to be sure that we're doing this the right way. I think it's appropriate to take a step back. I understand the people who say we should do X, Y, and Z, and there's no right answer, and it shouldn't be up to me, clearly. So it's just a question of, one of the things I would like to do is, could we name the Riverside Walk that's going to open up? Could we name the pier after George Cohen? Could we introduce some more names? Could we have Alexander Mitrovic Avenue or something, a better name?
See, I'm all for stuff like that, Dan. I'm all for that.
Gordon Davis Way, Bedford Jesard Lane. The kind of the things that other clubs do. Better than we have. Are there things we can do? Because we've got an illustrious history, and you actually literally have to come to Craven Cottage and ask someone about it before it smacks you in the face. And and I think there are just little things we can do, but you're constrained by the site, and it's not my, the decision will be for the ownership to make about that.
Yep.
And I just don't think the time, it's too soon to start saying.
It's too raw, I agree.
Absolutely imperatively do that, because we want to see what the family wants to do, we want support, and it may be that we can do something really innovative that isn't just a stand renaming, but is a real legacy for what the character of George Cohen, that encompasses the things he did off the field as well.
Very good, Dan. And I'm glad that you went into details and your thoughts on this. And as you mentioned, the family are grieving right now, so this is probably not the right time to go there. And let's wait until and talk to them about it, and the club should talk to them and see how they would like Fulham to honor George. And I think you've put out some really good ideas. All right, Dan, before hopefully our guest arrives, I do want to talk about the season so far. You also did this on the Green Pole podcast. I feel like I'm copying you a little bit, but I do want to talk a little bit about the season so far and get your thoughts on it. I'm going to get us started because I want to give you my thoughts on the season so far and then go to you on this. And this is the way I look at it, Dan. I'm actually extremely pleasantly surprised. Now, what I mean by this, it's not that I didn't think that Fulham wouldn't do well in the Premier League. It's the approach that they've taken it under Marco Silva in the Premier League that kind of surprised me, Dan. And I look back at some former Fulham sides, former Fulham managers, and I don't think they took the approach that Silva is. We're always on the front foot, Dan.
Who could you possibly be talking about there, Russ?
I have no idea.
I'm mystified. Is it somebody who's currently out of work?
Could be.
Is it somebody who didn't play Alexander Mitrovic? Is it somebody who likes a jumper and a smart coat?
Right. No, but in all seriousness, and you are right about all that. But when I look at the approach, Dan, and I look at the season so far, besides that Newcastle United match, Fulham have been in every single match, and they've also been on the front foot. They have not been afraid. They played with no fear. That is what has made this special for me this season, is that I feel that they can play with anyone, and that includes Man City. And I didn't think that was even possible. I know we were up a man for a good portion of that match, but they played with no fear. That, to me, is what separates this Fulham side from some others, and there have been some great sides, Dan, but what I love about this team is that they go into every match with no fear. That's the best way I can put it.
Well, you're absolutely right, but I don't. I'm surprised that you are surprised. I think what you mean is you're surprised at the effectiveness of this strategy in the top flight, because Marco Silva. I think that's the
approach, right?
Marco Silva was very clear that he was going to do this. I mean, look, I literally sat and listened to him after the Luton match. I was very, very fortunate enough to hear him at very close quarters that night say that he wanted to. There would be no compromise in his style. He would go for it. We would not change anything about our philosophy. And I thought, wow, I mean, that's either incredibly bold or we're going to have a similar experience to when we've tried that in the past.
Right.
And it's to Marco's immense credit that he's done that. It's the credit of the players. It's the credit of the club in terms of the recruitment that they've done. But it's also about the calibre of the team, some of the individuals. You know, we can touch on some people who are performing. Your compatriots are performing exceptionally
unbelievably
well at the moment. You know, I mean, we do have to touch on Tim Ream, who suddenly become a goal-scoring centre-back. I mean, amidst everything else, I mean, he hit that half volley. Earlier that 25 years had passed since one thing we referenced. I mean, it hasn't been that long. I still wonder if that was like a fever dream. And look, so I'm very impressed with Tim Ream. I'm massively, Anthony Robinson, both for club and country, has been outstanding.
Fantastic, Dan.
I can't think of a right winger who's had the better of Anthony Robinson in the Premier League. It's difficult for me to find a right winger who's absolutely had him on toast, as the British expression is. Right. And you could go right through the team. You could go right through the team and speak about, and we should really, but we don't have time.
No.
So that's the most impressive thing. What I would say is we don't leave a job half done, and Marco Silva is clearly a perfectionist. He wants everything absolutely right, and he gets. You only have to look at how he. You would have a better sense of this than I would at the moment, because unfortunately you're watching television pictures for most of the time that you're watching these matches, and when you watch the television pictures, Marco shows his frustration with the officials regularly. He's very demonstrative on the touchline, but the players warm to that. And look, we've done exceptionally well. Marco's been very clear, and the players have been very clear that the job's only half done.
Right.
They're going to attack the Premier League for the remainder of the season, and the approach is refreshing, and the results are extraordinary so far. Even though you referenced the game against Manchester City, that's the one I think Silva got wrong, and he's going to, he'll hunt me down and give me grief.
The approach after we went up a minute. I agree with you.
I thought we could have been a bit bolder there.
Yeah, that's actually a good point.
I don't know, but there's a reason I'm sitting here, and he's a multi-championship winning head coach, and he's got Fulham in the top half of the Premier League. Let's see where we are, and be quite clear about that.
Okay.
So yeah, look, we're just quibbling around the edges, but the key point is when you listen to Tim Ream, and I actually spoke to Tim Ream after the West Ham friendly, and he was very clear that he said that there was disappointment in the changing room. We're pleased, but we feel like we could have had more points.
Right.
West Ham away for very obvious reasons.
Oh.
I'm still angry. I'm still raging about that, Russ.
You should be, Dan.
I haven't. No, that's just not acceptable. Not happy with that. No, I'd like to understand that one. Arsenal away, I'm still very upset about, because I don't believe that the Arsenal winning goal should have stood.
I agree with that, Dan.
There's a foul on Bernd Leno. It's a clear handball, and there's probably a couple of other fouls in there too. And he didn't. The match official was not sent to the monitor for that, and yet the match official on Boxing Day was sent to the monitor to look at what, to my mind, looked like a fire. Anyway, it doesn't matter. I don't like VAR because I don't know what constitutes anything anymore. What's a handball? What's offside? What's a what's a foul? Just
right.
Get rid of it. Then we can complain about the referees. We can argue about it. And we can have one of the best traditions of English football, which is we watch the game and then we go to the pub or the cafe or for dinner and whatever, and we all complain not only about the players, the manager, but also the referee.
Right.
And some people can say erroneously that it'd all be fine if we had technology, and we know that's not the case, because fundamentally this is a means of interpretation. And the beauty of football normally is that the game is the same whether you play on a park pitch on a Sunday, as I did disastrously for many years, or you play in the Premier League, and it's just not true anymore because anyway, it says thoughts on the season so far. Well, I suppose they are vaguely connected to the season so far, but anyway, I'll ask the next question.
Okay.
We'll bring on our colleague
well, listen,
from Southampton.
Dan, we do have our guests on the line, so I'm going to bring him on the line. We're going to talk about the match now, so I'm going to bring him on with us, and this is Ben. Ben, are you with us?
I am. Good evening, guys. Good afternoon.
Ben, thank you for joining me and Dan Crawford, who's from hamyan.com and the Green Pole podcast. This is Ben from Total Saints podcast joining us right now. Ben, thank you so much for taking some time to talk about the match, and also we really want your insight on what's going on with Southampton.
Yeah, I wish I knew the answer, Russ, to be honest with you. I've followed them, 35 years now.
Wow.
A bit like you guys, I'm sure. I mean, there's more downs than there is ups with Saints. You tend to enjoy the ups when they do come along, but it's a bit of a mess at the moment, I think. I can't say I'm looking forward to tomorrow. I was doing some research for our pod on Sunday night and starting to look back through your recent results. And, whilst we've done fairly well at Fulham over the last few years, I think it's a different team that we're facing now. Obviously your tails are up. So as for us, I mean, well, as the famous song says, the only way's up. So we're hoping that that's the case because we're currently the strongest side in the Premier League at the moment, Russ.
Well, Ben, again, thank you so much for spending some time with us and talking about what's been going on. I want to start here, and maybe you can fill me in. I don't follow Southampton, obviously, nearly as much as you do. So I understand why your former coach was sacked, but I want to hear your view on all of this because I was a fan of his. I thought he did an excellent job over the course of a long period of time. I understand that it's the pressure to stay in the Premier League, and sometimes you need to make a change. What's your view on his sacking?
Yeah. So I've got to say, I think Ralph did a really good job with us. It was pretty much 4 years that he was in charge, and we were very much, hamstrung in terms of the money that we were investing in the side during that period. That our owner at that time was over in China, wasn't, for whatever reason, whether he wanted to or whether it was sort of government rules, able to maybe invest the money that he wanted to. So, Ralph was kind of working really with one hand tied behind his back almost. I had the opportunity to meet and interview him a couple of times for our pod. Really nice guy. He was well known around the club as someone that sort of pretty much worked 24/7 to try and turn the club's fortunes around. And that wasn't just the first team; that was the academy side, the B team, things like that as well. I think it's just like all of these sort of things. It just came to that sort of every cycle comes to an end, doesn't it? And I think. Right. For whatever reason, the results weren't going, his way. I think the players probably let him down to a certain extent. They're arguably doing that for the new manager already. So there's more to this than there is just Ralph. But I think if you sort of look at where the club was when he left compared to where it was now, we obviously had a couple of record defeats during that time, which I won't mention the score. Everyone knows what they were. Okay. He kept his job. He turned them around. So I think you'd struggle to find one Saints fan that would say he did a bad job. But I think probably it dragged on 6 or 9 months longer than it should have. And just finally, I think that the difference is that we had some new owners come in January last year. I think they've slowly been getting, kind of their head around what's at the club, some of the personnel that are there. We know new owners always want to kind of bring in their own people. They've obviously decided to bite the bullet with him just before the World Cup and brought Nathan Jones in. So sad to see him go, grateful for what he did, but, a new chapter and now we've got to move on.
Okay. And that's going to lead me to talk about, like you say, the approach, because over here, I'm here in America. And I can tell you a couple seasons ago, there was this great documentary done on Southampton, basically called The Southampton Way from NBC Sports. Fantastic. Right. And really goes through the whole history or modern history of Southampton. And I thought, well, this is a way to do it. So now you have new owners. Are they basically scrapping the Southampton way?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's an interesting one. I know the piece you're talking about, Joe Prince Wright, who's a good friend of mine, did that. He works for NBC, and he's a Saints fan as well. So I think probably had a bit of passion behind it. But I wouldn't say that they're necessarily getting rid of the Southampton way. I think what they tried to do in the summer is we've kind of been working on this model maybe sort of 5 to 10 years ago. It was like bringing the likes of Sadio Mane and Virgil van Dijk, selling them for big money. We then thought, well, let's go up a level and try, rather than bringing £10 million players in, let's try the 15 to 20 million bracket. But the problem with those players was they were kind of already developed, or they had a bit more of an ego to them. They weren't really wanting to come. Southampton has always been a stepping stone. I don't think we see ourselves as anything other than that. That's kind of how we entice players in, is come and play for us for a couple of years, like Van Dijk, like Mane, like players like that. You'll get your move to the big club. But what they've tried to do, I think, over the last 6 to 12 months is look at the big six, the Chelseas, the Man Cities, and say to some of their young talent, you're never going to game in the first team. Pep Guardiola's never going to play you. Graham Potter's never going to play you. Come and play for us. And that's kind of what they've done. They've brought in, Tino Livramento. We had Amanda Brozier from Chelsea on loan last year. We brought in a couple of Man City players. Sam Adozie played at the weekend, looked really good. So it's almost like the Southampton way has become bringing in youngsters from other clubs and trying to develop them rather than trying to develop our own. So you're right. It's changed a little bit, but I suppose the ethos of what they're trying to do is still there. Okay.
Dan, I want to go to you. Do you have any question for Ben here?
Yeah, I mean, thanks for taking the time and giving us the Southampton angle. It's really interesting because I'm like everybody else. I've been a massive admirer of Southampton and what they've tried to do, and it seems to me there's still a lot of talent in this squad at present. I'm a huge fan of James Ward-Prowse. I feel like if James Ward-Prowse was regularly in the England central midfield, then at international level England wouldn't have had the problems that they continually have at major tournaments in terms of keeping the ball and things like that. And it just seems like when you make a managerial change, and maybe we'll talk about Nathan Jones in a little bit, there just needs to be a period of that. But there's still enough talent within the squad. It feels like Southampton are in massively a false position at the moment, and with a bit of time, it could right itself, because there's a lot of teams clustered together, and this is a very weird season. There are a lot of games left. It feels like we shouldn't be pulling our hair out. I haven't got much hair left. I've supported Fulham for far too long, right? But I'm just sort of looking at it, and I said on another outlet, I felt like I watched the game against Brighton, and I thought, well, blimey, Southampton can't be that bad again. Like they really, and I know that, I'd seen Nathan Jones at Luton and a little bit at Stoke. His only win at Stoke was against Fulham, back in the day. It feels like am I being too positive here?
Yeah, I think you probably are, Dan, to be honest. But I think some of the points you make are absolutely spot on. I think the thing with Saints is that they really are lacking some leadership and experience. And, I was thinking about your team today. I was thinking, well, you got Leno, you got Ream, you got players like Tom Kearney, you got Mitrovic, who's a leader, as well. We don't really have that through our spine of our team. We've got a young goalkeeper in Bazuna who's replaced Alex McCarthy. Our centre-backs are changing. It's like a tombola each week with who's going to play there. James Ward-Prowse is, as you say, he's playing in centre midfield, but he's trying to do the job of 2 or 3 men in there, so it's affecting his game. And then up front, we've got, Shea Adams, Adam Armstrong, championship strikers. And I think that's been part of the problem for us, is we don't have the quality. I think Nathan Jones said it after the Brighton game, actually. We're not doing enough in either box. We're not defending well. We're not scoring goals. I mean, I was, again, working out today. I think Mitrovic has got, 10 Premier League goals this season. Saints have scored 14 as a team, so he's pretty much on a par with us. So I think that's been the challenge, is that there's not a lot of experience. So when they do go behind, and I was at the Brighton game on, I've lost all track of what the days are over Christmas. I think it was Tuesday, wasn't it? Their heads were down. Their body language was dreadful. I mean, as soon as the second goal went in, the own goal, you could just tell that they weren't going to come back from that. And that, for me, is the major issue at the moment. And just finally, I mean, again, I was looking at this ahead of our pod on the weekend. When we got relegated in 2004-05, after 17 games, we had 13 points and eight defeats. If we lose to you tomorrow, after 17 games, we'll have 12 points, which is worse, and we'll have lost 11 games this season. So that kind of tells you where we are versus that season.
Good stuff. Right back to you, Ben. I do want to focus on Nathan Jones, and Fulham do have a little history with him. How has he been viewed by your supporters?
It's amazing. I'm currently in the midst of writing some questions for Nottingham Forest fanzine for next week, and they said they one of their questions was about them having a run in with him as well. So I think everyone's had a run in with him, haven't they? But yeah, I mean, obviously I was surprised when they appointed him. I mean, I think we thought once Ralph went that I don't think we had sort of delusions of grandeur that we get Pochettino back or a Tuchel or something like that. But I think we felt it would be someone a bit like Wolves with Lopetegui, maybe some caliber and some experience there. So absolutely, I was surprised, but I think you have to put your sensible hat on. The guy's had, by the time he's played 4 games, one of those was against Liverpool, so away, so let's write that off. One was against Lincoln City at home, so let's write that off. So theoretically, he's had 2 Premier League games really to start to embed some of his ideas. And as I said earlier, I mean, the players need to pull some of the weight here as well. You can't just keep sacking managers all the time because it's not working. So he's talked a good game so far, Russ. The matches and the results and the performances haven't really backed that up, but it is still early days, so I'm not going to judge him yet.
Okay, and I think that's very fair. And I always say this, Ben, I like to give players, coaches a chance. I gave Scott Parker a chance, and Dan knows how I feel about Scott Parker now. I gave him plenty of opportunity, and that's just the way I work. And I give players plenty of chances, and that includes Fulham players. Right now, there's some that the fans aren't crazy about, but I want to give them a chance. And one is a backup striker. I want Fulham supporters to give him more of a chance before they make a judgment on him. So I'm there with you. On a manager, you got to give him a chance before you make a judgment. All right. Coming up next, we're going to break down this match, and we will end the show with predicting the match. Okay, Nathan, let's get going here. You've already mentioned a few names, but who are your key players in the match tomorrow?
So I would say certainly James Ward-Prowse. Obviously he's the heartbeat of the team, really. He hasn't been performing particularly well this season, but as I said a bit earlier on in the pod, he's kind of been having to do the job of sort of 2 or 3 players. I think at the back, Mohamed Salassi was at the World Cup for us. He's a fairly solid and reliable defender. He's strong. He's still fairly young. So again, he's learning his way in the Premier League. And then I think other than that, we've signed players in the summer, for example, Joe Aribo from Rangers. He played very, very well at Rangers, but he didn't start against Brighton. Stuart Armstrong, who's another creative player, didn't start against Brighton. He brought both of them on at half-time, which kind of told a lot about, maybe making a mistake with his selection in the first place. But I just get the sense that he's going to go defensive and not want to take the game to Fulham. It's almost going to be a case of trying to frustrate you guys, I think. So, I was trying to think about this earlier. I couldn't tell you now necessarily what front 4 or 5 he's going to pick, but I think Shea Adams will play Russ, and he probably the other one that I pick out. He's the only real goal scoring threat we've got, in our side, really. So he has a habit of finishing the hard chances, missing the easy ones. Everyone probably remember him handballing it in from 1 yard out at Wolves earlier in the season. So so there's 2 or 3 of them that could, will the others will be relying on, absolutely.
Okay, excellent. Dan, I want to go back over to you because I want to get players to watch your perspective. From a Fulham perspective, who has to play well for Fulham to get all 3 points?
And just to say, Shea Adams has a history of scoring a lot of goals against Fulham.
I was going to say that, but you stole my thunder.
From his Birmingham City days, scored at least 4. So that's something. I don't know if you're coming down to London for the game tomorrow.
Yeah, I'm not, unfortunately, but yeah,
there might be, but that's something to at least cheer your fellow supporters up. That he normally finds he condemned us to the playoffs. Years ago. We did go up via the playoffs. So let me actually answer Russ's question rather than I think the central midfield is going to be where it's going to be won. To the point that we've talked about, that James Ward-Prowse is water carrying and playmaking and trying to embed that sense of leadership into the team, and you can see that he's struggling because he's not at the level that he has been, and actually his level has been exceptional over the last 5 years or so for Southampton. I think that's worth saying. So it's actually a former Southampton player who I was very surprised that they let go to us in Harrison Reed. Who's been absolutely, and he's a completely different player over the last sort of 12 months for us to the player that we saw.
Not the same player. I totally agree, Dan.
as a holding convention. And I was totally against, I'll throw my hands up. I was totally against the idea of reinventing Harrison Reed, who was essentially a holding midfielder, an energetic terrier, into a box-to-box midfielder, because he went 100 games without even coming close to, in terms of when he got in the box, and then he scored 2 goals in 5 minutes. So Harrison Reed clearly will be motivated to play in that game, and I think he's fit and ready. João Paulinho is arguably the signing of the summer for Fulham, and potentially in the Premier League as a whole. I still don't know how we managed to prize him away for such a small amount of money. And to me, if you control the midfield in any level of football, but if you control the midfield, that gives you the right to play and be adventurous, and that's so key. And that's what we were talking about earlier with Nathan Jones. Is he going to put men behind the ball? Is he going to try and? Is he going to? I think that might be the way that Southampton start initially, but once you're going, you've got those. I mean, I'm a big fan of Stuart Armstrong, for instance. He scored a fantastic goal for Southampton at Craven Cottage. It would be about 5 years ago now. But
I remember that, Dan.
The 3-2 game.
It was a great strike. And Joe Aribo, similarly, in terms of quality that he can take from Scottish football into English football, and you've got to give those players time to do that. And Joe hasn't either had the time or the playing time, the regularity of playing time, as we've referenced. And that's just around that point. I think the central midfield is going to be key. We can all say Mitrovic. That's just an easy answer, and I'm not going to go there. And also, Mitrovic he's not quite right. He's not fully fit, and that is quite frightening given what he did at Crystal Palace. But what I would say is Crystal Palace were a shambles defensively. I mean, I haven't seen a team quite as bizarre as that for a long time, and they did help us out quite a great deal in that match. So, Salisu is a really promising defender. He's got real pedigree. I'm interested to see how that goes, Salisu against Mitrovic. And then can Fulham get those runners beyond Andreas Pereira? Potentially Bobby De Cordova-Reid down the right had a really good game at Selhurst Park. Those are the players I'm looking at to see if they can replicate those levels of performance, because Fulham have exceeded their level over a long period of time this season, and I'm just coaches now looking at it know what the Fulham template is. It's not a surprise.
No.
And Nathan Jones is a very good coach. He did exceptionally well with Luton. He is a very good. He's very good at motivating players. He gets people all behind him. He just needs it's the central midfield is the key. If he gets it right, as we talked about, and doesn't make the wrong selection, it could be a long afternoon. And that I think is Southampton's game plan to start with. Quieten the crowd, because it's going to be an emotional day. And quieten the crowd, frustrate, get people winning tackles, and then get people on the ball. And Che Adams, I'm tempted to back him to score a goal, because it normally comes off. Anyway, I've said enough.
Dan, please don't say that, okay? Okay, so back over to you, Ben, and I think Dan did a very good job of giving maybe a little bit of a blueprint to how Southampton can win this match. But I want your view as well. I also want to add this, because I think a major key in this match for both sides, it's going to be set pieces. Fulham have been excellent on set pieces. We know how good Southampton can be on set pieces, especially with James Ward-Prowse. So I think this is a major key to the match. But overall, your view, how does Southampton win this match?
Well, I think that's a really good point, actually, Russ, because I was thinking about this. Liverpool, we lost 3-1. They scored, I think, 2, if not 3 of the goals from crosses. We then Lincoln City scored their goal against us from a cross against Brighton. The first 2 goals at the weekend, both crosses. So the point being, if we want to win this match, we need to defend crosses a lot better than we have been doing recently. A bit like Dan said about Che Adams, I put Mitrovic in my fantasy team to try and curse him because that normally works. So hopefully that will be one way that we can win the match. But we are going to need to defend well against him. We know he's a powerful lad in the air. He's full of confidence. I know Dan obviously mentioned he's not fully fit, but he's caused us problems, a lot over the years as well. So I think in terms of defensive areas, we are going to need to deal with balls that come into the box a lot better. Nathan Jones seems keen to play 3 at the back. The Saints team don't seem keen to play 3 at the back, centre backs that is. So it'll be interesting to see if he does go with 3 centre backs tomorrow or not. As for the other end, we need to take our chances when we come. That's the trouble with Southampton. We are only going to create in any Premier League game 4 or 5 really, really good chances at an absolute maximum. We are probably going to take 1 or 2 of those at an absolute maximum. So when the chances do come along, we're going to need to take them. I think, I've said it the last few weeks on our pod, the first goal is massive. I think if that goes in, from your point of view, you can see Saints head players going down, I think, quite quickly. So, you're right, it is going to be an emotional day after, the sad loss to George Cohen. And I think, that will be interesting to see how that atmosphere plays out. But I think Saints have just got to focus on what they got to do, which is, as I said earlier, be better in both boxes.
Okay, excellent. Back over to you, Dan. Let's look from the Fulham perspective. How does Fulham win this match? I think you've already said a little bit of what you believe the blueprint is. It's in central midfield, but feel free to expand on that.
Oh yeah, I mean, I just look at that as a key area because that's the area that Southampton will look to block up, because Fulham are only able to play this expansive football because you have essentially, and they're not quite 2 holding midfielders because neither of them are quite just as solely that, but they are. I hate the term, but there's the double pivot in a 4-2-3-1. But how Fulham win this match? Well, we need to put pressure on the Southampton. I found it really interesting. Nathan Jones does play a back 3 centre halves. Do Southampton have 3 centre halves of pedigree at the moment to field in that? Therefore you can't. No. Therefore you can't.
Not sure we have one down.
And this is the problem, right? So. And they will be trying to find Mitrovic with crosses, but actually I think the focus on Mitrovic rather than negate what Fulham have done really well this season, which is create problems in other areas. Mitrovic is only effective in that penalty box as a predator like he is because defenders are also worried about other people. If you just, and we saw it enough in previous seasons, Russ, if Mitrovic is the only one in the box, or in previous seasons, he wasn't anywhere near the box. He wasn't even on the bench for some of the time. I mean,
let's talk about the former manager.
Give me strength, frankly. I mean, yeah, right. So, but the point is getting numbers in the box, more than one, and that's been the really exciting thing about watching Fulham is that they've committed players forward. Pereira, Harry Wilson has not. He's had a bad injury, so he's not been as effective this season or played as much. But Bobby Decordova-Reid has been outstanding, whatever position he's played in. And Willian, actually, I was quite withering about the prospect of reviving William's experiences in English football. And I haven't seen we've got Tim Ream, a 35-year-old, doing things that 25-year-olds can't do, and we've got Williams seemingly, leading. I mean, he was against, unfortunately, Nathaniel Klein, a great Southampton player of the past, and clearly he's seen better days because William, made him look. I think he's 31 now, Nathaniel Klein, and he made him look a little bit older than that. Really, it's quite sad because I thought Nathaniel Klein. Remember, many years ago, and I've commiserated with him by text message about Southampton's current position, and he's very withering about it, and but the key is having multiple threats in forward areas. That means that you can't just say, the opposition manager Jones can't just say to Salisu and whoever else is going to play in his back, it's going to be a back 4. I can't imagine he's going to go to a back 3 that Ben's outlined. Nathan Jones can't just say, look, if you take care of Mitrovic, that's fine. You don't need to worry about, because we've got too many numbers in the Southampton box, and that creates passing angles for people to pick out. And that's the key, because Marco Silva wants to play on the front foot. Right. Now, that does create opportunities. If Southampton get through the first 20 minutes, they see more of the ball. And that's the thing I want. Southampton traditionally, they've come to Craven Cottage and put on exhibitions of passing football in the not too distant past, and we've been embarrassed several times, and also at St Mary's. In the way that they can control a game, and that was what you were referencing with the Southampton way and some of those methods of play, right? And I do think that's still there if you can get Aribo, Armstrong, Ward-Prowse, strong technical footballers to use the ball, the building blocks in place. If they can get through the first 20 minutes, I think it becomes I was reading something in a newspaper today that this is one of the easiest games of the season for Fulham. And just right.
I don't see it that way, Dan.
Well, no, neither does Marco Silva. It's very interesting. He completely demolished that question. This is a great way to round off 2022 as if these journalists have never had any experience of watching Fulham. We're great at surpassing expectations in the worst possible fashion. You think, oh well, we've done really well, and then we'll fall over at the final hurdle when it's right in front of us. And I do worry about a lot of people just saying, oh, effectively we only have to turn up, and Southampton have been so dreadful. And that's very dangerous. This is an important game for Southampton. I think it's important for Nathan Jones for the reasons that Ben has outlined.
Yep.
He needs to start showing because otherwise it's very difficult in the January transfer window to persuade the players of the calibre that he needs. We know this from the last 2-3 times. How many times we've been relegated? 4 times? I can't remember. Plenty. Yeah, no, but I'm saying, the January transfer window is your salvation as a club that needs recruits, and Southampton will need new players, because Jones basically came out and said, I haven't got the quality to put on the pitch. So this is an important game for Southampton. It's a massive game for Fulham as well. Yeah. And we've got to approach it with that mindset that nothing is won. You win it on the pitch by the way you play. And you've got to earn the right to play in every single game.
Okay, excellent, Dan. All right, guys, let's end the show with your predicted starting 11 and also your prediction for the match. So, Ben, I'll go to you first. Give me your starting 11 and a prediction for the match.
Sure. All right. Well, I think let's work on the proviso that he's not had enough time on the training ground since Brighton to sort the back three out and things like that. So we'll assume that he's going to play 4 at the back. So Alex McCarthy, I think, has still got a niggle. So I think he would have changed goalkeeper actually, but I think Bazuna will be in goal. I think Walker Peters will be right back, probably with Salasu, and I think hopefully Bella Kotchapel, who's German international, will be fit. If not, Lianco played against Brighton, so I'd imagine one of those two. Raymond Perot is pretty much one of the few left footers we got in the squad at the moment, so I expect he'll be left back. Centre midfield, obviously, it's going to be James Ward-Prowse next to him. I mean, it's genuinely, it's hard to tell. I mean, it could be Ibrahima Diallo, it could be Joe Aribo, it could be Romeo Lavia, who was pictured back in training today but hasn't played for several months either. So again, I would imagine he will probably stick with Diallo, and then the front sort of 4. So I think Sam Adozie played really well against Brighton, the youngster left wing. I think he'll probably quite rightly be deserving of a start. I hope he plays Stuart Armstrong sort of in what Ralph would have called the 10 in the hole there, because I do think we need some creativity. I think Mohamed Al-Younisi will play right midfield because whilst he isn't overly exciting footballer, he does work hard in terms of defensive, and I think that's, again, thinking about shoring it up. And then I think Che Adams will probably play up front on his own. And I think, just to finish, I think we kind of need to, hope a little bit that Fulham kind of almost follow what Dan's just said there, that the mentality of that team tomorrow for Saints' point of view is that they turn up thinking these lot of bottom, first goal, we'll cruise to victory, that sort of thing. And I think we just have to hope that, Saints have got a little bit more grit amongst them and, catch Fulham on an off day. So I do think it will be hard. I'm reading some of the comments there. I think there's a few of your viewers that are fairly confident as well. But I think Saints will be better than they were against Brighton, but I think they'll probably get edged out 2-1 personally.
Okay, excellent. All right. Dan, over to you. give me your starting 11 that you think Marco Silva will go with, and then also your prediction. I do know your prediction from the Green Poll, so again, I already know it. So I'm expecting you to stick.
I can't
with
change. Yeah, I'm nothing if not consistent. I did say it was going to be my co-hosts, my colleagues are much more optimistic than I, and they both predicted wins. And I'm nervous about this game. But the main host of our show last night, Alan, he said it'd be a nervy 1-0 possibly if Fulham can. He was nervous about it, and we didn't talk about it beforehand. And I have an iffy feeling about this, and I went for 1-1 because I remember Christmas games against Southampton. There were a couple of draws when we were down in the doldrums, and then I remember that year we brought Mitroglou onto the pitch, and then Southampton beat us 3-0 in a very ruthless display. I mean, that's the kind of thing.
That was Pochettino, I think, wasn't it? Yeah.
It was. And what a manager, if I might say. Just right. And look, I think Marco Silva will pick the same team. Russ, do you want me to list the 11? I mean,
no. I think everyone knows the same team.
Yeah.
The only thing I want to ask you, Dan, about this, and I'm all for the same starting 11. Who's going to be the player to take the shirt from Bobby Decordova-Reid? Because I don't see anyone being able to do it at this point.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, look, I'm of the opinion that Bobby deserves running the team because he's one of those great players. If I can throw a Southampton parallel in there, he's the Chris Baird of this side. Right, we took Chris Baird from Southampton. It was quite acrimonious at the beginning of that transfer took a long time, and Bairdinho, as we ended up calling him, because he scored a couple of screamers at Stoke. He started as a right back, then he was really a centre back at Southampton, and he played right back for Northern Ireland. So Laurie Sanchez tried him at right back and wasn't good. Then he suddenly popped up as a holding midfielder of great repute. Then he became a playmaker, and we knocked Juventus out of the Europa League, and wondrous things started to happen. Bobby Decordova-Reid has played at right back, right midfield, right wing, in the hole. Centre forward, false nine, left wing. I think he'd play in goal if you. I was going to say
I think he's played everywhere but right.
That's it, right? So, but who are the people to sort of edge him out? Well, you've actually got a surfeit of options.
You do
in those wide areas. We do like a winger at Fulham. You've almost got a first team squad full of wingers. You've got we've mentioned some of them. Willian is one. Obviously, Niskin Tabano was in great form until he got injured and can play both sides, and hopefully he comes back. We're enjoying watching his Instagram stories of him keeping his spirits very high during this injury layoff. Then you've got the two Welsh boys, Harry Wilson, who I mentioned, and Dan James. We haven't quite seen the best of Dan James. I'm not ready to write him off yet because he hasn't had that run in the team. So Marco Silva does have options in those wide areas, but you can't drop. You can't drop Bobby Decordova-Reid after what he's done. But he might do. He might just make me look silly. He likes doing that, Marco.
Okay, well, I definitely wanted to get your thoughts on the situation with him because there are so many options, Dan, but you can't take him out. And when I think of Bobby Decordova-Reid, I'm glad that you brought up his name, I think of Bairdinho. I do. So it's a very good comparison. And it's also a good tribute because they're both players that have made themselves very vital to Fulham Football Club. So whatever you think of Bobby Decordova-Reid, that he's not a starter at this position, at that position, he keeps proving you wrong. So I think you need to keep him involved until he shows you he shouldn't be involved. So I'm there with you, Dan. All right. So Dan's going with 1-1. Ben,
what's your prediction?
I'm going to give my prediction. I'm going with actually Ben 2-1 to Fulham. So I'm going to go 2-1 to Fulham. I think Fulham are going to win. Dan, I understand though why you're going 1-1. You're not as I'm more. I wouldn't say more positive. You are just a little bit more, cautious, and I appreciate that from you. But I'm going 2-1.
That's all right. You can disagree with me. It's fine. That is allowed. It is your show after. It is your show after all, Russ.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Well, good stuff. Well, great show, guys. I really appreciate you both joining me to preview this match. Ben, before we wrap this up, tell us a little bit more about your podcast and how everyone can find it. And also, as I've mentioned on this show several times, we're now part of the talkSPORT fan network, Cottage Talk. So is Total Saints.
That's right. Yeah, we obviously joined them a couple of months ago, probably a similar time to yourself, Russ, as part of the new fan network, which we felt was a good opportunity. I mean, again, Southampton aren't the most fashionable team in the world, so a good opportunity to maybe connect with a few Saints fans that are dotted around the world that aren't maybe already listening to the pod. But yeah, I mean, we're a weekly show. We're like you, we do it on StreamYard on a Sunday night and then pop it out as a podcast on a Monday morning. And you can find us on all the good, bad, and ugly podcast channels that are out there. I won't list them all, but I'm sure everyone knows what they are.
Okay, excellent. Dan, as always, thank you so much for joining us tonight. And Dan, you can always read Dan on hammin.com. And really, a truly wonderful podcast with you and all of your hosts on that podcast, the Green Pole podcast. I would highly recommend it. Dan, thank you so much.
Absolute pleasure, mate. I just want to say good thank you to Ben for coming on, and good luck for the rest of the season. Hopefully it improves. You know, we know what it's like down there, but Southampton, when I was growing up and Southampton were playing at the Dell, they had many a miraculous escape from these types of positions.
I was going to say, Dan, we're used to it as well, to be honest. So,
yeah, well, exactly.
Yeah.
But a happy New Year.
Pleasure to talk to you both.
Happy New Year to you, and hopefully 2023 is very much better than what's preceded it. Happy New Year to you, Russ, as well, and all your listeners. And great, I've had great fun talking to you both. It's been brilliant. Thank you.
Oh, great, Dan. Thank you so much for saying that. Well, it is time to wrap up this episode of Cottage Talk. For Ben from Total Saints Podcast and Dan Crawford from the hammin.com, I'm Russ Goldman. Thank you as always for watching and listening to Cottage Talk, now part of the talkSPORT fan network.